Okay, yes, it is true. My credit score was once 350. I more than doubled it. I increased it by over 450 points. What we're talking about today is what actually happened in my behavior and my mindset that made that happen. Because we've all heard that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So it wasn't enough for me to just hear what I had to do and start doing it. Most of the time, if it was that easy, I think we would all be really proud of our behavior. That's not exactly how it happened. It wasn't that easy. You may have caught my previous video, which is all about like the actual detail, how it got that low, what happened, what I did to improve it, and what that's led to for me today. I didn't really get into, though, what I was doing internally, the internal work that I had to do to get there, because I believe that that's the key. We can go and follow these steps all day long, but we're going to burn out. We are not going to feel very motivated to do it if we're not making changes to improve our behavior, to actually learn. And it's just not going to be sustainable if we're not doing that work to make it feel better for ourselves. In case you're new here, my name is Amy. If you've been here before, I'm really glad that you're back. And I'm really excited to talk about this because truthfully, this is the topic that kind of led me to figuring out more about money and understanding finances. Like a lot of you watching, this is not something that we were exposed to of what to do. I learned a lot of what not to do. That is no critique of anybody who was influencing me. That's just what the facts were. The difference for me is that I finally got to a place where I decided enough is enough. Even though I didn't learn this before, even though I wasn't taught this, I'm not going to let that be an excuse anymore for me for why I still have this situation, and I certainly didn't want it to continue into the future. So I'm going to talk about 3 main things that I learned through this and applied, mindset shifts that not only allowed me to start paying my debt off, but to continue to pay it off, to increase my credit score and increase it by a lot to the point where now, where it's been years, where my credit score has been sitting over 800. It's about creating these habits and behaviors where you are going to make those changes that you don't have to think about it every day anymore. And that is what I hope to help inspire you with. And this doesn't mean you have to be trying to increase it by hundreds of points. It could just be a little bit, but these tiny little things really make a difference. Now, for me, one of the very first things I had to do to actually make any changes is I had to stop blaming people in my life for my circumstances. This was all happening around, I was still a teenager. I think it started around 19, 18 and continued until I was about 23, where I really it was just getting worse and worse. In that time, my main suspects were my parents that I was blaming. They said they were helping me. They weren't able to help me anymore. The main part of my debt went into collections, and that is what really made my credit score take the biggest hit. And really, I had no credit to begin with. All of that just made it significantly worse. I blamed them. I blamed them for not helping me, for saying they were going to, not being able to do it anymore. And out of spite, I didn't do anything about my credit for several years. In fact, I made it a lot worse by making other poor decisions. There was just a lot of kind of blaming of circumstances also. And I hear this a lot from a lot of people on all sorts of subjects, not just money, but this idea of blaming, well, I never learned. I was never taught. This isn't how it was for me, things like that. And truthfully, that's all true. But that's not going to do anything to change your life. And at that point, we're being victims. I decided I didn't want to be the victim anymore. I wanted to be the hero in my own life and do something about it. Thankfully, there came a point when I was able to consciously realize that I was blaming. I was blaming things. Historically, there were so many things. There were so many situations and aspects that I was not ready to take responsibility for myself. Eventually, thankfully, I had enough experiences that made me feel like, okay, I need to just get honest with myself, get quiet with myself, and figure out exactly what I need to do. If I stopped blaming everybody, what am I left with here? I'm left with me and my really bad credit score and some debt and not a whole lot of money I'm making. I was in college at the time, but I knew that I wasn't going to let myself settle. I knew I had more potential. I had no idea how to connect to it. I just knew I had that. That was the first big mindset shift. And to be honest, this was like almost 20 years ago now. And this is still one of the most significant mindset shifts I have had that I still apply today and don't really need to think about it as much anymore. But I know is one of the biggest reasons why I have been able to reach so many other goals in my life. The second thing is kind of similar, but also very different. I stopped making excuses. Now, it was one thing to stop blaming my parents, but it was another thing where I was still making excuses like I'm a college kid. I'm still very young. I still have time. I'm having fun, things like that. Making excuses like, well, I'd rather go on the vacation instead of paying that off, or things like that. Those things weren't serving me. Those excuses of what I hadn't been taught, that was not going to get me anywhere I wanted to actually get to in my life. I wanted more. I've always been very ambitious, but I have had a hard time knowing how to kind of direct that ambition and kind of keep some tunnel vision. But it took me moving actually from a small town in Michigan to the city of Chicago. I moved there after having some pretty severe anxiety, and my cousins lived there. They had a room. They said, you can come and be our roommate. And I thought, I don't think I ever want to live in a big city, but I'm going to do it after a few months because I just didn't know how to better myself where I was at and what my circumstances were. For a long time, those things I just mentioned were excuses for me. It was actually after having such a bad panic attack, I had to go to the hospital, and in there, I remember texting my cousin and I said, okay, is that room still available? I was there 2 weeks later. For me, it was going and making a big move like that, being 100% responsible for myself financially, which I kind of was, but I had moved back home to my parents. It was just really easy to just kind of get by. And so when I moved to Chicago, I also just had major kind of culture shock and more self-awareness to me and areas that I was kind of embarrassed about as I was exposed to just different people and things like that, where I just was like, wow, this is really great that I'm doing this because it's really helping me grow up much faster and be exposed to so many other things. That was very important. Ultimately, it was a mirror back to me of my behavior and my excuses, and it helped me see people who had what I wanted. One of those things was I wanted a college degree. No one in my family had one. And for some reason for me, it was a goal I could set for myself and actually attain it or try to attain it. I am so glad I did that. It did teach me how to keep going, how to not give up. And I ultimately studied finance. That experience in Chicago really helped me recognize where I was still keeping myself stuck, where I was still making a lot of excuses. Another one of those excuses was, at the time, I could not get my college transcripts to transfer so that I could use the credits I'd already taken and apply them toward my new school. I ended up taking classes at a community college while I was paying off the money owed to collections and increasing that credit score so I could get those college credits. That was a really big deal at the time. If you have aspects that feel so big and so daunting that you can't attain, and that's kind of what's keeping you stuck, I promise you that there is a way to navigate through it. And this kind of leads me to the third thing, which is taking everything one day at a time. Knowing I had so much work to do on my credit score. I was excited when I got to 550. I was excited when I got to 600. These felt like such big accomplishments. I would have never gotten there if I let the idea of getting from point A to point Z be all I was focused on, because I never would have started. I would have thought, how am I ever going to do it? I have no idea how. I don't know how to get to Z, so I'm just not going to start. That's what a lot of people do. And that's also what gets us stuck. And that is why approaching it one day at a time, one step at a time, is exactly the way that I have been able to accomplish this and so many things in my life. I am a big believer that when we set goals that are just way too big, we often fall short because they're not attainable. We also never allow ourselves to set a goal that seems too small because we think, well, that's not going to do anything to actually change my life. What's the point? Those are easier to not show up to. But for me, it has been one small shift every single day that has literally changed my life. It has increased my credit score more than 450 points. It has allowed me to pay off debt. It has allowed me to get that college degree which took me until I was 27 or 28. It doesn't matter how old you are for any of this. It doesn't matter about the time. The time is going to pass. I am much older now, and I will tell you that I am so grateful that whatever that was inside of me that told me to look into this or that, to just keep going, to just keep showing up, that I listened to that over everything else. It really has been the foundation for everything else in my life. I just really want to encourage you, no matter what your goals are, and maybe you don't have any goals at the moment, maybe you don't feel like you are worthy of goals, or you have too many things to fix before you can have goals. Whatever that looks like for you, I encourage you to sit down and write down some things that maybe do seem like great desires and goals. Just start journaling on it. But if you know what those goals are, you can reach them, but you have to just start with one thing. What is one thing you can do today? Especially the thing that you feel most resistant to. That's usually what you need to pay attention to. For you, it could be going and printing your credit report. Go to annualcreditreport.com. You can get it for free. Print that, look at it, see who the collections agencies are, start calling them. Tell them, I can give you this much today, or I can't give you anything, but I'd like to set up a payment plan. I'd like to get this paid off. They want their money too. It can be calling a friend who you owe money to and saying, maybe you haven't talked to them in a long time because you're really embarrassed or ashamed. That's okay. Send them a message, call them. Send them some money on Venmo. Say, I want to start paying you back whatever it is. By doing this, by showing up for yourself, by taking responsibility for this, and doing that where you're not looking at how anybody else is behaving, even if they're affecting where you're at. But if you just say, what is my responsibility? This is my life. This is my credit. This is my future. These are my finances. I want to better myself. The people you see who have what you want are almost always the people who have taken that responsibility for themselves. They haven't allowed other people to get in their way or to stop them or hold on to the resentments and allow that to block them from getting to what they want. And you don't have to let that happen either. But it is so much about getting honest with yourself, getting humble, having that mirror to mirror back to you, not blaming anybody else or any other circumstances, not making excuses anymore for why you're not doing the things you know you need to do. Really trusting that if you just show up to this one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour, you will start to reach your goals. But you will not know that if you don't do anything. And I promise you that what that's going to do for you in just a year, 6 months, 6 years, whatever it looks like for you, it will change your life. I cannot imagine how I would feel and who I would be had I allowed myself to stay in the place I was in. I don't take that for granted, and I continue to show up for myself still. And that is why I'm able to feel satisfaction and joy, because how we do one thing is how we do everything. When I was staying complacent in one area of my life, ultimately that was affecting everything else. And I was showing up with similar behaviors. As I started to improve these areas, everything else started to improve slowly too. And I just really encourage you, start reflecting on what it is you want to achieve, the areas that you know you need to start looking at. Start making a little list of the things that you can do to get started. I would love to hear any of your thoughts or comments. And also feel free to private message me if you'd like on Instagram. The link is below. I know that this topic can be really hard for people, but I promise you, it's always so much easier. The anticipation is always the worst part. I know you can reach your goals, even if you don't know that yet. I will talk to you next time, and I'm really glad you're here.